Well, hello YouTube, I'm back. This is Zack. Welcome to Zack Wing Music, and welcome to the fifth and hopefully second to last, and even more hopefully the shortest installment of this, what did I call it? Crash Course in Music Theory series. If you have been tracking along, I know you haven't, but if you have, we've covered quite a bit of stuff. This video will hopefully not be as long. It should be a little bit more simple, or a little simpler, or is it more simple? I don't know. You probably don't know either, so that's okay. Last time, what did we talk about last time? Last time we talked about the chords that naturally occur within a major scale, the triads and seventh chords that naturally occur within a given major scale. So to refresh your memory, if we are in the key of F, there's an F major chord for you. If we are in the key of F, then F major is our one chord. G minor is our two chord, our two minor chord. A minor is our three chord, three minor. B flat is going to be our four major. What is this? C is going to be our five chord. It's going to be a major chord. The six minor is going to be a D minor. And then, wait, no, I did that wrong. The E diminished is going to be our seventh chord, or seventh diminished, and then you come back to the one chord as you go back up. So each of those chords can be represented with a number. But what is the significance of the number? Well, I'm going to tell you that, but first I have to beg you to subscribe and like my videos. So please subscribe and like my videos because they take a really long time to make, and I would love to know if anyone actually cares. So subscribe, like, follow me on, what are those things I use? Facebook and Instagram, and that's all I use. I'm not even culturally relevant enough to use anything else. But I am on Facebook and Instagram, and you should follow me. And if you have any questions, you can just message me, and I should be able to respond. Because I don't expect many people to do that. So if you do that, I should be able to get right back to you. Anyway, so back to function. What do I mean by function? In order for you guys to understand what I mean by function, I'm going to give you an example that is typically used in classical music. When I was in school, when I was in college, we studied a lot of classical music. Unfortunately, I hated it. And while we were there, the professor told us that there are certain schools of music theory, of classical music, that divide all of those chords, those seven chords that I just played for you, all seven of them, they divide them all up into three categories. Those being tonic, subdominant, and dominant. Now, what do we mean by let's start with tonic. What do we mean by tonic? So, like, the one chord is tonic. The one chord is home. The one chord is where everything makes sense. The one chord is where everything is resolved, and everything is at peace, and everything is at rest, and you don't have to do anything else. To give you an example, I'm going to play something, and you'll just feel it. You'll just feel it in your bones. Here we go. Here's a nice one chord, then a two, three, four, five, six, seven. What if it just ended like that? You would be angry. You'd be angry because you're waiting on, right? You hear all this tension, and you're like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And then it resolves. That resolution, that's what people are talking about when they say tonic, when they talk about the root chord. I don't think anybody says root chord. I might have just made that up. But tonic, that's when there's resolution, and everything is at peace, and everything is nice and pretty. That's when the chord progression sounds resolved. So the one chord is going to be your tonic. So that's that. What's next? Subdominant. What does subdominant mean? Well, dominant, we're not there yet, but dominant is going to mean there's lots of tension. It wants to resolve. So if dominant means lots of tension, wants to resolve, then subdominant means some tension, not as much as dominant. It can resolve, or it can go somewhere else, right? So if we are in the key of F, our subdominants are going to be the 2 and the 4. So let's just do the 4. So let's do a B flat. There's a little bit of tension. It kind of wants to go back to 1. Right, you hear that. 1, 4. It kind of wants to go back to 1 and resolve, right? But it is subdominant, which means that it can go up to something more dominant. So it can either go down to 1 and resolve because it does have some tension, or it can go up to something more tense, like the dominant chords. The dominant chords will be 5 and 7, and in our case that would be C and what would that be? E diminished. C major and E diminished. So I'm going to play a 1, a 4, and a 1. That's tonic, subdominant, tonic. Now I'm going to play a 1, a 4, a 5, and a 1. So that's tonic, subdominant, dominant, 1, tonic. You could hear on the 5 there was more tension, there was more of a desire to resolve. So the tonic is where everything is at peace and at home, and nothing needs to be resolved because everything has been resolved. The subdominant has some tension, so you can take it down to the tonic and resolve it. That'll sound good. Or you can take it up to something with more tension, namely the dominant chords. And when you have the dominant chords, they want to resolve. They want to go back to the tonic. In my theory class, my music theory class in college, the professor would count you wrong if you took a dominant chord to a subdominant chord, because you're going from something tense to something less tense. So that's the idea, is tension. You create tension, you create even more tension if you want, but then you eventually have to resolve. That is the concept. People that think this way typically identify 6 as a tonic of some sort, because it is the relative minor of the major. And if you don't know what that is, I don't think I've explained it yet, but I do think that I'll explain it in the next video. So you can just remember that term, relative minor. They also typically consider the 3 a tonic. I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think they're just trying to push that into a category so that it has some place to go. I don't really see that as being a tonic, but I don't really spend a lot of time in the classical music world, so what do I know? Either way, I think understanding this concept of tonic and subdominant and dominant, or creating tension and then releasing tension, I think it helps you to understand what I mean by function when I say that each chord has a function. However, this little section of classical music theory is very black and white. Pop music is not going to follow all these rules, or there's not a lot of rules, follow these couple of rules. Even the rest of classical music doesn't necessarily follow all these rules. I would assume. I don't actually know that. I'm just kind of making a bold assumption and then hoping it's true. So the rest of the music world isn't going to be this clean cut. You're not going to be jamming with somebody on like a funk vamp and be like, hey man, we need a tonic. Let's go to the 3. That's never going to happen. But hopefully now you get what I'm saying when I say that each of these chords has a function. So what you need to start doing is start listening very attentively when you learn and when you play, and start to listen for the function of each of these chords. You'll start to notice that each of these chords has a particular character to it, has a particular thing that it does in the chord progression. It's really hard to express this with words, but eventually you'll be listening to a chord progression and say, that's a 6 minor. Yep, that's a 2 minor. Yep, that's a 3 major. You can just start hearing them because you hear what they're doing in the chord progression. You hear their function. You hear what they contribute to the chord progression. So if I were to just sit down and play this for you. Somebody with well-trained ears that kind of understands this whole functional harmony thing would say, hey, that was a 1, a 6 minor, a 4, and a 5. And then you could, on your instrument, if you knew what key it was in, play the exact same thing, or at least the exact same chord progression, maybe not the exact same set of notes. But when you hear that first chord, you hear that you're in the tonic, you hear that you're resolved, and then you hear a minor something or another, and then you know that it's still resolved sort of ish. It hasn't really gone anywhere, so you know that's the 6. And then it goes here, and you know that's kind of a strong chord, but it's not quite as strong as the 5, so it must be the 4. And then it goes here, and then you know that's a pretty strong chord that wants to resolve, so you know that's got to be the 5. And then it goes, and then it resolves, so you know that's the 1. That's how this thought process works. And of course, it gets more complicated than that in other styles of music. There's modulations, there are borrowed chords, there's non-scalar tones that work their way into the harmony. So there's a lot of stuff out there. So I'm trying not to oversimplify. But the idea of function, the idea of hearing the numbers is super important for a bunch of reasons. I'll give you two. The first one is, like I just said a second ago in that example, you can hear what people are playing and then immediately play it. So when you're learning a song or when you're trying to play along with someone, you can just hear the numbers and then immediately pick up your instrument. And if you know what key the song's in, you can play it. If you don't know what key the song's in, you could ask or just piddle around until you find it. I often have people ask me to play songs that I've never played before, but because I know this concept, I can kind of play the song back in my head if I've heard it enough times and say, okay, it starts in a 1 and then it goes to where? It goes to then it goes to a 2 minor and then where does it go? And that's how I can play songs that I've never actually played before, just from memory, just from hearing the song over and over again and knowing how music works, knowing how this whole functional harmony thing works. So when you're learning songs, when you're hearing songs, playing by ear, stuff like that, this whole functional harmony thing is super important. And then the other thing that would make it super important is writing music. So when you are writing a song, you're probably going to use a variety of chord progressions. And as you're writing the song, you could say, okay, where do I want to go? Do I want to give it the color that a 3 gives it, or do I want to give it the color that a 6 gives it? Do I want to make it super black and white like the classical stuff, like subdominant, dominant, tonic? Do I want to blend in some other really weird colors? You can think in these terms rather than just saying, hey, I wonder what a B flat would sound like. Hey, I wonder what this would sound like. You can know what it is that each of these chords are doing and do them intentionally as you write songs. So that is pretty much all I have for you guys today. In my next video, I will take pretty much everything that we've learned thus far and kind of do it in a minor key instead of a major key, and I'll show you the couple of differences that are going to pop up. But right now, as I write my last couple things on the whiteboard, I am going to tick off my theory professor and play a 1, 5, 4, 1, meaning a tonic, dominant, subdominant, and 1. And that is all. Have a good day.